Hello to all of our listeners. My name is Tofe, and today is another great day to be a social worker. Welcome to Social Work Amplified, a podcast hosted by SPEAK. SPEAK stands for Social Policy, Education, Advocacy, and Knowledge. And our mission is to amplify the voices of social workers by providing resources, increasing students' political engagement, and facilitating network opportunities. SPEAK would like to gratefully acknowledge the generous support of the Simmons Sisters Fund at Texas Women's Foundation. I would like to introduce our guest for today's podcast, Alison Mohr Boleware. Alison Mohr Boleware has been a licensed social worker for 6 years. She received her Master's of Science in Social Work from the Steve Hicks School of Social Work at the University of Texas at Austin with a community and administrative leadership focus. She received her undergraduate degree from Texas A&M University with a Bachelor's of Arts in International Studies, minors in Sociology and Asian Studies. Allison is a fifth-generation Texan and currently serves as the National Association of Social Workers Texas Chapter Government Relations Director. In her role, she advances the National Association of Social Workers Texas legislative agenda at the Capitol and beyond. Allison has also worked as a Health Policy Analyst in the Governmental Affairs Department of the Texas Medical Association. Previously, she served as a policy fellow for the Hogg Foundation for Mental Health, participating in the Hogg Mental Health Policy Academy. During the 84th legislative session, Allison served as a legislative aide to former State Representative Elliott Naishtat, also a social worker. When not at the Capitol working, Allison enjoys spending her free time traveling, finding new coffee shops, and relaxing with yoga. Hello, Allison. How are you today?
Hello, I'm doing well. It's so funny to sit there when someone's reading information about you.
We're so excited to have you on today.
Thank y'all for the invite.
You're welcome. So we're going to get straight into the first question, and that would be, what led you to obtaining a master's in social work degree? I realized that your undergrad was actually not in social work. What kind of made you make that decision to obtain it in social work?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So when I was getting my undergraduate degree in international studies, I studied abroad in China. And that was my first real experience going abroad and experiencing another culture to that degree. And I lived there for 3 months. And when I came back to the United States, I really saw I had reverse culture shock. And I think it really challenged me more than I anticipated that it was going to. And so I really grew interested in what experiences were like for people that come to the United States and what those experiences are for people that come from different cultures. And so when I was trying to explain my interest to another student, but I didn't know what I wanted to do, they recommended that I look into social work. And they were like, that sounds like something that a social worker would work on. And so I started looking I had never heard of social work before. And my school did not have a social work program. So I wasn't exposed to it at all. And when I started reading about social workers and I saw the work that they did empowering people and empowering communities, kind of doing humanitarian work from an empowerment place and a strengths-based perspective, I thought that sounded like what I wanted to learn how to do. So once I read about social work, I really felt like that was the right place for me. And once I started my master's, I joked that it was like finding my people. I really loved the environment. I loved that everyone was working to try to make the world a better place, but trying to do so in a way that really empowers people and does so from the strengths-based perspective that I think, we're all constantly trying to evaluate ourselves and learn and grow together. And I think I really saw that in the social work field.
Awesome. It's interesting how different things lead us to obtaining that master's in social work degree. So was there anything from your experiences in China that kind of triggered you or made you feel like you wanted to be a social worker? Were there any big things in the where you were at that said like, okay, we need to implement that in the United States, or, anything like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I don't know that it was any one particular thing, but I think when I came back to the United States, I did a lot of self-reflection on what it would be like for someone to come to the United States and experience the culture shock that I had experienced, kind of doing, living in another place that's so different, that has so many different cultural values, and then coming to the United States. I think I did experience, I was learning Mandarin, but I was definitely not fluent. And so just the experience of trying to navigate a world where you don't speak a language fluently, I think it gave me a lot of empathy and understanding for people trying to do that in the United States. And so I think that a lot of the ways that I looked at things, like it shifted to trying to think about things from the person's perspective of trying to navigate a space without being in the dominant culture.
Interesting. So what made you decide to focus, like have a administrative focus instead of like a micro focus or anything else?
Yeah, so I've always been interested in kind of things from a more macro scale. In high school, I did debate. And so I was really involved in thinking about things from a lot of different perspectives and trying to solve problems. And so that was kind of the frame that I'd always had, and kind of no matter what I ended up going into. And so when I thought about social work, I was way more drawn to macro than to micro. And that was just my personality too. And then once I did my first field placement, I think like a lot of social work students, I really saw what I liked and didn't like and what I felt was natural to me. And I definitely, after every session that I did case management with a client, all I was thinking about was the barriers that they had and the reason why they were in the situation they were in. And then thinking about, kind of the policies that would help them break out of the cycles that they were in. And so I think even in a micro situation, I was always thinking about things from a macro lens. So it felt more natural to me.
That makes sense. You're always prone to that macro field.
Mm-hmm.
So I know a lot of social workers, or to like our social worker students that are listening, or upcoming social worker students that are listening, we kind of all know about the NASW, National Association of Social Workers. We're kind of familiar with what they do, but because you work there, can you kind of give me your definition of the National Association of Social Work and tell us what they do?
Yeah. I'm happy to do that. So I think one of the first things that I always tell people about NASW is that we are the ones representing y'all at the Capitol and representing y'all at state agencies, at board meetings for the Social Work Licensing Board or the Behavioral Health Executive Council, that we are there to serve as the voice of social workers. And so that's kind of our first role, right? And so that's why we need members to help tell us and guide us the directions that we need to go. We need to be talking to social workers on the ground. And because I'm a policy-focused social worker, I need to hear from micro social workers on what are the real issues that they are facing, but also what their clients are facing. And so NASW not only serves to both educate our own, profession, but also to guide the profession towards our values and to constantly be reevaluating and trying to grow as a profession. And I think that that's a big focus of NASW right now, is trying to, unlearn harmful practices that we've had as a field for so long, but trying to relearn together and grow together to be, a more equitable profession, and to try to move forward in a way that is a lot more inclusive and equitable than maybe some of the ways that our profession has been in the past. And what I love about NASW is that we're not shying away from these hard conversations. We're really trying to, embrace the space, let different social workers bring their own thoughts to the conversation. And I think we've really seen that within NASW the last year or so. And I hear it all the time from our interns. They're constantly teaching us things, challenging us, calling us out on things. And I think that's a big part of what NASW is trying to do, is to grow and move the field forward.
Thank you for your explanation. It's not just, NASW is not just a field, or it's not just an organization where we get our code of ethics from. You guys are representing us. I really like that. Okay, so we're moving on. For upcoming social work students that might be interested in a position like yours, can you provide a brief insight into what you do overall or what a day looks like for you?
Yeah, when I saw this question, I really thought, wow, I wish I could just show a screenshot of my calendar. It's really, I'm in meetings all the time, and it's not a bad thing at all. It's one of my favorite parts of the job. It's very collaborative work. And so I would say if someone wants to go into this type of role, that you need to be building your collaborative working skills, needing to be building your relationship skills, which are micro skills, but we use them in this more macro space. Also, how do you communicate with others? That verbal and written communication is so important. But just a day in the life for me is that I'm constantly having meetings with either internal partners that we're working on projects together, or at the Capitol, working with legislative offices, legislative staff, or state agency staff, trying to move forward on NASW Texas priorities, whether it be something related to social work licensing or the mental health workforce, or LGBTQ plus rights. Like, those are topics that we've been really weighing in on, especially in the past couple of years. And also we're on a lot of work groups and coalitions. And so it's a lot of meetings or preparing for, different projects, and a lot of writing, a lot of just collaborative thinking, jumping from thing to thing. So I would say if you like kind of dynamic work, and if you like juggling 1,000 balls in the air at the same time and kind of a to-do list that never ends, then this might be the type of role this might be the type of role that you're interested in, because I think it's for people that are really trying to think about things in unique ways and trying to solve really complex problems in a state that is, it's not always easy to solve some of the problems that social workers are trying to solve, especially with the political environment of our state.
Okay. So you mentioned that you collaborate a lot with different types of people. So the people that you collaborate with, are they mainly social workers, or do they come from different fields?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there are a lot of social workers that work in and around the Capitol. And I think people are always surprised to know that, there are offices that have social workers that are chiefs of staff or legislative directors. There are also a lot of social workers that do similar roles to mine, but for other groups. So there are social workers that represent people with disabilities, or people in the mental health field. Also, I'm blanking right now, the pediatricians are represented by a social worker. So there's a lot of social workers in and around the Capitol. But honestly, a lot of my work is with non-social workers. So meeting with external groups that they don't have social workers employed with them. But I'm trying to always bring the social work values to the conversation. But when I do get to work with social workers in and around the Capitol, it's always an extra joy. And we always kind of have an extra little, vibe, because we're both social workers, or we're all social workers, which is always very fun, because there are times where there are no social workers in the room and it's challenging, or the Capitol and all we're hearing all day is no. And so it's really nice to kind of have the time to talk to other social workers about it and rebuild our, fill the tank, the energy tank, and feel more confident and positive after talking to them.
Oh, awesome. I like how you mentioned there's so many social workers at the Capitol. I don't think a lot of us students know that or aware that we can potentially at the Capitol.
Exactly. And we need more. And that's like one of my favorite things to see, is when we have social work students interning in and around the Capitol.
Oh, cool. Okay. So a good amount of advocacy has to do with policy. And in the article you read earlier, it said that you recently worked as a health policy analyst in the Governmental Affairs Department of the Texas Medical Association. So what did that look like for you? What is policy creation at that level or in that department?
Yeah, so what things looked like there was, I was one of 3 social workers there, and there were, it was a very large office. And so, as you can imagine, the same way that NASW represents social workers and the needs of social work clients, there are other groups that represent other professions. So TMA, Texas Medical Association, represents physicians. And so when I was there, we were working on a ton of topics that were related to more public health related initiatives. So I worked on mental health, substance use, rural health, EMS and trauma, and medical homes and primary care. So it was kind of more general healthcare topics. But what I really learned there was a ton about Medicaid. And I was constantly analyzing bills. I was watching state agency meetings, and kind of the policy analysts were expected to kind of be the in-house experts, quote unquote, on a topic. So when we got a question about a topic from a legislative office, I would be asked, what do we think about this? Or how would this impact physicians? Or how would this impact patients? And I think that's where the social work values come in, because I was always trying to bring up how things would impact patients and how things would impact Texans. And so that was a really cool space to be in, because we were trying to talk about things that would improve the health of all Texans, and really trying to look at things that, were impacting, certain groups disproportionately, or were impacting underserved Texans, and different things like that. So it was a more behind the scenes job. I learned a lot about how to analyze bills quickly, because I had to analyze a lot of bills. But it was definitely a good space for me to learn more about how to think of negative impacts of bills and also positive impacts.
Oh, cool. So did you and the other two social workers, did you guys ever work on a specific policy or try to push it to be approved?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there were times where things were happening in the public sphere that we were kind of pushing internally to get a statement made on. And there were a couple of examples where we were really able to work together to try to ensure that TMA would make statements on things that were more social issues. And that was a really cool experience, because we were able to talk about and kind of use some of those skills of sharing and really showing why it mattered for us to speak out on something. Because there were three of us, it was really helpful to not feel alone in that.
Awesome. So, as a macro social worker, you have had a variety of experiences, and you've also had the opportunity to work at the Hogg Mental Health Policy Academy. And that's a fellowship that I personally haven't heard about. So what did you experience? What did your experience there entail? And can you tell us a little bit more about the Hogg Mental Health Policy Academy? And what are some of the skills that you gained during your fellowship?
Yeah, so I'm very passionate about the work that I did there and kind of the learning that space provided. So I actually worked at the Hogg Foundation for Mental Health, but I was a member of a cohort within the Hogg Policy Academy. And what was neat about that when I was there, and they're still doing this now, is that they have 5 fellowships. So the Hogg Foundation funds 5 fellowships, policy fellowships, that are at different organizations. So maybe they work on different topics like criminal justice and mental health, or disabilities and mental health, but they have to all work somehow with mental health. And so a fellow is at each of those locations. Then they also started doing fellowships for peer support specialists or peer recovery coaches. So people with lived experience of mental health or substance use. And so they started doing 5 fellowships that are also for folks that fall into that category. But together, we were all a cohort together learning about policymaking. And so it was a really cool experience. And I think that some of the skills that I learned there were to really listen to people that are impacted by the services. So I was really challenged a lot to, kind of take off my social worker hat and to not only think about things from the provider perspective or the social work perspective, but to try to think about things from the consumer perspective, or the person with a mental illness or with a substance use disorder. And it was a really, really good learning experience for all of us together as a cohort. And we were working on bills together at the Capitol. We would work on a bunch of different, collaborative work on topic areas that we all kind of agreed on. And it was a really neat experience. And honestly, the skills that I learned there have really helped what I'm doing now, because I learned a lot about how to compromise, how to, hold strong to your original idea, but to make flexibility so that you can bring more people on board so that you can move your idea further along. And so there were a lot of skills there in that space related just to policymaking, but also mental health and substance use. I learned a lot about the mental health system in Texas and how much more is needed to help it meet the needs of our state.
So did you, at the Hogg Fellowship, was it more like hands-on, or did you like sit behind a desk and just do a lot of research?
Yeah, it was definitely hands-on. The fellowship that I was in was kind of similar to the job that I'm doing now, where I was doing a lot of meetings. I was, doing a lot of different work with other groups to try to collaborate to move forward on a policy idea. While there was some research and writing involved, I was not just sitting behind a desk, which I think, again, some of that experience, you just get hands-on. And I think that was a cool opportunity within that fellowship.
Okay, that's cool. So you mentioned like a variety of skills that you've kind of used during your macro career so far, such as collaboration, being able to like step in the other person's shoe and then come back and play that role of a social worker. So what is one skill do you think is absolutely necessary in the macro field of social work?
Yeah, wow. I mean, I think that the top one that I would say is communication skills, because that's probably the top thing that we do is write and talk. So it's a lot of, how do you respond to people in email that, hold strong to what you're trying to do, but also still respects them and gets the point across. It's about learning how to communicate clearly and concisely when you're talking to legislators and legislative staff, and you only have a couple of minutes of their attention. Also, it's about how we write and how we can get our policy ideas across, but definitely communication, I think, is such a big one. And I always encourage students that you will learn this as you do your internships. You will learn this as you take your first, second, and third jobs, not to stress about it, but to know that that's something that you're going to be learning, and knowing that it's something that you will not be perfect at, and not to take that feedback negatively. I got a lot of feedback when I was a staffer at the Capitol on my writing. And at first I was offended and I took it personally. And honestly, all it was doing was teaching me how to be a better writer and how to communicate very complicated policies in a way that the average person could understand them. And those skills are learned, and that takes time.
Yeah, I would think so, because those policies, just reading them, an average person reading them, it takes a while to even understand it, to be able to effectively communicate it, just like simplified form.
Exactly.
So now we're going to go ahead and move on to the political engagement questions. So in what ways do you choose to remain politically engaged? I know that you're a macro social worker, and majority of your job is advocating for people, and especially social workers. But outside of that, what ways do you choose to remain politically engaged?
Wow. So I think for students, what I always recommend is just trying to, first and foremost, stay plugged in. So follow groups on social media that you care about their issue area. Follow us on social media, NASW. We have a specific Twitter page that's just about advocacy. It's NASWTX_advocacy. And we're constantly updating people on things that they can do, but also just information. And I really think that being plugged into the groups that are doing the work on the ground is a really good way to just stay up to date with what's going on. Reading the news, listening to podcasts, listening to different perspectives than your own. I also think it's good to follow if you're on Twitter, follow a bunch of different types of social workers. Like I follow social workers from across the country, and I feel like I'm always learning about, what issues they're experiencing or what they think is important. And so taking that information and then following what's actually happening at the Capitol. And to be honest, it is tricky sometimes to get engaged. So that's why I think being plugged in and looking for opportunities. So when you see someone say, send a letter here or send an email here, or, here's a call script for something, actually doing that and taking that opportunity because those exist. And then you're helping to push forward a momentum that's already in existence. You're pushing forward an idea that's already moving. And I think we see that a lot right now with bills that are at the national level. So you'll see people say, call your senators about this, call your legislator about this. Those calls really do make a difference because they want to know what their constituents think. So I know that it feels a little intimidating at first, but I encourage people to make the call, send the email, and actually start that engagement, sharing things on social media that are from reputable sources that, share information about bills. Those types of things can really help kind of start you getting more politically engaged. And then how I am politically engaged in my personal life is that I spend a lot of time educating people in my life about different issues. And because I'm from a rural area, and because I'm from a family that has some views that are different than mine, I really see my role there as an empathetic educator and to listen to people and try to create a space where people feel that they can talk to me about different political issues. I also listen to a lot of podcasts, and I think that, of course, this is a plug because this is a podcast right now, but I love podcasts. And I think that it's a great way to take in information without having to stare at a screen. If you can listen to it in the car while you're on a walk or cleaning. I always listen to different political podcasts just so that I can learn about issues that I don't know about, and to listen to people that have different views than me. Because that's the only way that we can really grow and learn is if we try to listen to other people.
You said a lot of good things. And I think one thing I caught when you were encouraging students is we don't always have to do something new. We don't always have to do something new. We can join a movement that's already going on, and we can those opportunities that are presented to us and just like be that additional number, be that additional or write that additional number. And then like the way that you remain politically engaged kind of encouraged me. You said that you kind of talk to the people in your life. And I feel like sometimes, individuals won't do anything unless like an actual human being brings it to their attention, Sometimes we see stuff on like maybe social media, the news, we're like, oh, it's not really affecting me, here right now. It's not that big of a deal to us or to the individual, but once somebody in our lives comes and brings the issue to like, this is a big problem and this is actually how it affects you or eventually will affect you, it kind of causes somebody to take action. So
Yeah, and I think if I can just add one thing, I think that sometimes people forget that bills will be filed multiple times before they pass. And so if you come in and want to work on something, it's actually more effective for you to support something that's already being promoted by a bunch of other groups than it is for you to try to create a new idea for a new bill.
Yeah. So you kind of mentioned like staying plugged in and stuff like that. But I do know a lot of people struggle with, or at least I personally struggle with, living in an information overload society. You don't know what information is right, it's too much. So how do you deal with that? Or what can you say to, like, what can a student do in an information overload society? How can we manage the information we receive so that we can still remain politically engaged at the end of the day?
Sure. I think that this is something that all folks working in this space grapple with. And I know everyone handles it differently. And some people, choose to all the time outside of work also, volunteer with a political campaign listen to only political podcasts or only read books about politics. And personally, for me, that's not feasible for my own brain, my own mental health. So what I've really tried to do is to create intentional times that this is the time I'm going to read the news, and I don't just doom scroll. Other times that I'm really intentional about when I'm going to be spending time reading the news or when I'm going to be spending time volunteering, and that I try as much as I can to create boundaries with that. But I know everyone's different, and some people, don't think for them that doesn't work. But for me, that's been the way that I've been able to stay engaged in this, is that I create specific times to do that so that the rest of the time I don't feel pressure to constantly be reading the news or following every, urgent alert. So it is overwhelming. And like you said, it's an information overload. And I think we have to, as social workers, protect ourselves because we're bringing in a lot of really heavy information. The way that sometimes I've talked to people about it that aren't social workers is that all we're hearing is how challenging things are all the time. All we're hearing about is all the problems. Mm-hmm. And so I think if you can create spaces where you're intentional with your time and the information that you're ingesting, then I think it will help you long term to not get burnt out because you've created some of those boundaries.
That's good advice. And I think I would add to that, kind of maybe trying to read about or take in information about the wins that we receive. Sometimes we don't ever focus on that positive aspect of political engagement. Mm-hmm. Kind of focus on the challenges, like you said. We always hear about the challenges, but there are a lot of things being won at the state level and stuff like that. There's a lot of bills that are being passed because of the work that people are doing.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. You have to, in my opinion, if you do this work, you have to be okay with incremental changes, and you have to be willing to accept, things are outside of your control sometimes.
That's true. So what I would like to ask you, what age did you start getting politically involved?
Wow. So I am going to date myself here. I was able to vote when I was a senior in high school in the 2008 election. And so that was the first time that I remember getting politically engaged, because I took that duty very seriously and I researched both candidates. I remember watching the debates with my parents, and I really cared about who I voted for. And I wanted that person to represent my values. And so since then, I've been really interested in, how politics do align with us carrying out our personal values. And for me, it was always about equity and human rights and helping create a more just world. And so, that was my first time getting politically engaged. And then in college, I worked on a couple of campus things. I'm trying to think of what it was called, like a campus ballot measure to try to get funds. One was called the Aggie Green Fund, which, looking back, it's so cool to see how much has been done with that. But we were able to get students to vote in approval of adding $5 onto their tuition each year. And that would be called the Aggie Green Fund, and it would go just towards environmentally friendly projects on campus. So it's really cool because I've gone back to campus and seen things with a little sign next to them that said funds provided by Aggie Green Fund. And so it was cool.
Awesome that you get to actually see your effort, tangible results. Okay. So if you could start all over again from the very first time you started getting politically engaged, what would you do differently, if you would do anything differently?
Wow, I thought of a couple of things when I read this question. And the first one was that I would not be as hard on myself. And that was not just kind of about political engagement, but also just being a young professional. I think that we're all, a lot of us set really high standards for ourselves. And especially going into social work, a lot of us have aspirations to, come in and fix things and help people. And I think that all of us need to be more gentle with ourselves and kind with ourselves as we're learning about it and as we're entering into the professional space. But specifically for politics and political engagement, I wish that I had, also been more gentle with myself, because there were times where I would put so much pressure on myself to do a bunch of things all the time. And I think now that I am a little bit more seasoned, I've kind of learned that this is a long game, especially doing this work in Texas. This is like a long game, and you can't burn yourself out. You have to be realistic, and you have to acknowledge where your strengths lie and work in that space. Like I don't have as much time as someone else. So I'm not going to volunteer to go block walk, but I will do text bank or phone bank, because I can do that from home. I can do that with more convenience. But for people that have more time, yes, go out and do a block walk for a campaign that you care about, and I think that I give is to not get burnt out, try not to be hard on yourself, and to think about your strengths and try to, work within those strengths with your own political engagement.
Thank you so much for that advice. It's solid advice. I think majority of the other people that we've interviewed say the same thing, that it's a marathon, not a sprint. So
yes,
change your approach. And we're gonna wrap up with this question and leave our viewers with a resource to walk away with. What's the number one website, or in your opinion, what's the number one website that helps social work students with political social work or advocacy?
So I'm going to selfishly say Take Action page of NASW Texas, because we have specific campaigns that social workers can engage in there that we have already created. We already have language explaining what the bill is or what the issue is, why it matters to social workers. And then we have direct links where you can email your legislator. And if you type in your if you type in your physical address, it'll automatically populate to who your legislators are. So it takes out a ton of work. So I'm going to selfishly say that as the top resource. But another resource, because I can't leave this out, is the Texas Tribune. Just to stay involved and engaged on a nonpartisan news site, the Texas Tribune is always what I recommend for all of our interns when they start here. Read it, follow it, and see what's going on. And that is a great way to stay educated without it being an information overload.
Okay, thank you. So we have the Take Action page on NASW website. And then we also have the Texas Tribune, two websites that we can use to stay politically engaged, take action, and also stay informed. All right. Thank you, Allison, for spending time with me today. Thank you to all of our listeners for joining us for another episode of Social Work Amplified. I hope you were able to learn something today that empowers you to become more politically engaged and helps shape a better tomorrow. Until next time.